Today, we're playing the lottery in a sense. If you watched the last episode of the build series, you know that in addition to the 89 Restomod I'm doing, I also picked up a pair of 91 Range Rovers. This was a really unique buy. I'll leave a link to that video if you want to go back and look at that to understand what I mean by that. But we've reached a really important milestone on this car in that we are going to see if it starts. And I'm about to explain the process of that, but also why we're playing the lottery. Okay, so this is the 91. It's one of two. The other 91 I parted out and sold, and was able to accomplish what I set out originally to do on this car, which is my assumption was for what I purchased these for, including transport to get them here to Atlanta, I would be able to part out and sell enough from one of the cars to basically pay for both. So we have done that. So what you're looking at is a 1991 Range Rover Classic, short wheelbase. It's had one owner. It has 84,000 miles, which is obviously very low for a 91. And it is essentially free. I sold enough from the other car to pay for everything to get these two here. So what we now have is an interesting scenario where this car, which basically cost me nothing, could end up being one of the best bets ever, or could end up needing some work, which I'm planning to anyway, because I am going to do a full Restomod, but work beyond just the cosmetic, meaning engine repairs, things like that, or could end up being a parts car for all I know. So I'm pretty excited to get into this and figure out which direction this is going later on today. Got some help coming over to go through the process, but let me walk you through what we're going to do as it relates to trying to start this car. So if you guys have a barn find or an old vehicle hasn't been driven a long time that you've purchased, you understand kind of the methodology and approach that I'm taking. You can use that and other elements and tons of videos online as well to formulate your own process of how to best tackle these kinds of projects. Okay, so just for kind of overall context, a couple of things I checked to start before I start the process, and I'll talk about what's here on the hood and all that. I looked at all the belts to make sure that none of them had any kind of major tears or rips or cracking or anything like that, and that they were all attached. So I've already checked all that in the engine. I checked all the wiring in the engine bay just to make sure everything was connected to the proper devices, that the wires weren't chewed through, things like that. I actually found a number of wires that were chewed through. A good bit of it was actually ground related connections here at the front left wheel well from, you know, squirrels, mice, whatever. So I redid all that wiring just to make sure we've got good ground connection. I went into the vehicle and checked the ignition and actually found out that the ignition lock on this car that was here on the steering column was stuck. I couldn't get a key in it, wasn't able to really use it. I had a locksmith look at it. And so what we did is actually we took the ignition lock and the ignition out of the other parts car and transported it into here. So that's been hooked up. And then I took the key and I inserted it and turned once. So I didn't start the car, right? But I just turned it one click to get all the dashboard warning lights on the car to get a sense of if there was anything really critical, what are the faults I should be reading. Now, inevitably, there are going to be some faults like maybe oil pressure or ABS pressure, things that would make sense for a car that hasn't been driven 10 years. But I want to make sure there wasn't like ground faults, electrical fault, something where I could do a lot of damage by trying to start the car without addressing that first. So we've done that. Every fault that's on here currently is something that should make sense given that it hasn't been driven. So we should be good to start. The other thing that I did is I checked all the fluids. So I took the oil dipstick, I took the transmission fluid dipstick, and I took the antifreeze cover cap off and just checked to make sure there are fluids. Now, surprisingly, there were fluids in this car. And I looked at the oil and I looked at the antifreeze and everything is the color it should be. So it's not that the oil is like overly dark or super thick, and it's not that the antifreeze or coolant is not the right color, which in this case was a neon green. Everything actually is, and it's all full. So it leads me to believe that despite the seller telling me that these were driven onto a trailer about 10 years ago and haven't been driven since, somebody may have changed the fluid on these cars at some point. Or given that there was kind of a jump in the history, the person I bought these from got them from a family friend, and he's the one who told him about the 10-year thing. Honestly, these may have been driven more recently than 10 years. I'm just taking his word for it. But either way, there are fluids in here and they are proper. So I'm actually not going to change all the fluids. That said, if you check the oil and it looks suspect or there's none in there, it's bone dry, whatever, you definitely want to change the oil If you look at the coolant or antifreeze, you probably want to change that. Now, you're not going to be driving the car too far after you just start it once, so that's not as critical, but you get where I'm going. Check the fluids to the extent they look bad, they're non-existent, they're too low, change all that stuff out. Then we get to the part that I'm going to explain here. A couple things we're going to do. Number one is the gas tank. And so I've looked at the gas gauge, again, by turning that ignition one click. The gas is showing bone dry E, lights on, the whole deal, which is of course what you would expect. You know, this car, if it's been sitting that long, probably doesn't have any gas in it. That said, you want to be sure you get out any old gas if you can. It's a best practice, I would say. So what I've got in order to do that is you can go on Amazon and just get one of these gas siphon kits. They're super cheap. Basically a pump. It was like 20 bucks. And this will allow me to put this down into the gas tank, take an empty gas can, and pump out any gas that's sitting in the gas tank. So we're going to walk you through how to do that. Obviously, after that, step 2 would be to fill it with good gas. So this is 93 octane premium fuel. Picked up, 3 gallons, maybe 4 gallons. This is, I think, a 5 gallon. You don't need a ton, obviously, but we're going to put new fresh gas in it. This will either go in without any old gas or any residue, which would be ideal, or at the end of the day, if there is a little bit of old gas or whatever left and residue in there, this will mix in and kind of at least get you closer to the proper octane of gas to get the engine started, things like that. And then the third thing is this fogging oil. So we're going to remove the spark plugs, give access to the top of the cylinders within the 8-cylinder engine, and we're going to put this fogging oil in the cylinders. And this is because there hasn't been oil running through those cylinders in quite a while, is the assumption. And this will give it some lubrication to make sure the cylinders can move freely and that they're not stuck or they don't grind or score or anything like that when you try to actually turn the engine over. So we're going to do that, and then we're going to hand crank the engine. So we're going to get under here. We're going to, take a torque wrench, a breaker bar, basically, and crank the engine to move all 8 cylinders at least sort of 1 or 2 rotational cycles through to make sure the engine is not seized and moves freely on its own. Once we've done all that, we're ready to start, and then we'll see. To the extent this starts up, I think I don't have to explain that having an 84,000 mile single owner Range Rover Classic that has 0 rust and is in this kind of condition, that is free and runs, would be, as I mentioned, open the video, like winning the lottery. That said, if there are mechanical things we need to do, we're probably going to troubleshoot a little bit of that ourselves. So maybe it's a fuel pump, or maybe it's something with a distributor. If we get too far into that and we're just still not making progress, then the plan is to flatbed this, take it into one of several really good indies here in the Atlanta area that do Range Rover and Land Rover, and get them to work up a quote. And at the end of the day, if it's a few $1,000s worth of engine related swaps and repairs and things like that, it's still a very small investment for a super low mileage Range Rover Classic. So I'm optimistic overall, but I'm excited as you are to see if this thing just starts once we go through this process and we're in business. So without further ado, we're going to take you through the process of doing that and see what we got.